Oofies.
Alright, you're good.
Hooray!
No way, Dante's different comedy.
Alright, guys. Today we're going to be talking about... wow, it's just moving on its own. Alright, today we're going to be talking about a lot of different people with a lot of different ideas. And you're going to have to balance these concepts in your mind. So, try your hardest, please, to follow. And if you're not following, please have that humility to ask a question.
Vigil.
Alright, let's do Vigil. And Dante's Divine Comedy represents human thought and how far it can take you short of grace.
I have a question.
Okay, yes.
Can you give us a title for your presentation? So we know.
I forgot to do a title, yeah.
So we know what we're looking out for here. Just a short little synopsis.
Play-Doh and my favorite color.
Isn't it Virgil?
Must have been a typo in the source, bro. I copy-pasted this.
Oh, dang. Okay, yeah, it's Virgil, but wait.
Oh, we could just have to show us how smart he is.
Sorry, I took a semester worth of class on it.
So Lincoln is clearly gaslighting us. It says Virgil. Okay, so let's get into it. Augustine, in his book City of God, says, "Whatever philosophers, therefore, thought concerning the supreme God, that he is both the maker of all created things, the light by which things are known, and the good I'm not doing that voice. And the good in reference to which things are to be done, that we have in him the first principles of nature, the truth of doctrine, the happiness of life, whether these philosophers may be more suitably called Platonists, or whether they may give some other name to their sect, whether we say that the only chief of man is the Ionic school, such as Plato himself, or that we have well understood him, have thought thus." Sorry, these old people talk weird. Or whether we also include the Italic school on account of Pythagoras, or the Pythagoreans, and all that we have held the like opinions, and lastly, whether we include all these other guys. It is evident that none come nearer to us than the Platonists. So Augustine is saying here that they got a lot of things right, including that creation came from one specific source, and that they came to a lot of really accurate conclusions with the nature of reality of truth. And he makes a claim that Platonists are the closest. So we're going to be talking about two different schools starting out here. The Italic, or the Italy, or the Ionia, or the Turkish school. So these are going to be philosophical schools. Talking about these four dudes, starting off. So starting out with our boy Pythagoras, really old dude. He was born in Greece. We don't know a lot about his early life, like with most people that are in the BC. Pythagoras, he went to Egypt to study with the temple priests. Which temple priests? Likely Zoroastrian. Likely some sort of New Agey garbage. Egypt was captured by the Persian leader and Pythagoras was taken prisoner to Babylon. He studied with the Persian priests there. Pythagoras returned back to Italy and started his own school called the Semicircle. Pythagoras left Italy again and made a religious and philosophical school. Initiates were sworn into a secretive, communal, and ascetic life. Pythagoras died, his school attacked by politicians. Him and his students fled, unable to find shelter. They all starved after 40 days. He had no surviving authored writings, and he is actually he coined the term philosophy or philosopher. Before this, they were just called sages. And so when people asked him, what are you? What's your duty? Well, he said that he loves knowledge. So Philo, Sophia. So what are some of the teachings of our boy Pythagoras? Well, 3 key points here. His most popular is the metempsychosis, or whatever you want to call that, or the transmigration of souls, which holds that every soul is immortal and upon death enters a new body. All right, so we got that kind of reincarnation,
Right.
Very early form of that. Another is the Musica Universalis, Salis? I don't know, whatever, which holds that the planets move according to the mathematical equations and thus resonate and to produce an inaudible symphony of music. He's also the father of numerology. The number 1, the monad, represents the origin of all things. The 2, the dyad, represents matter. And the number 3 was an ideal number because it had a beginning, middle, and an end, and was the smallest number of points that could be used to define a plane triangle, which they revered as a symbol of the god Apollo. Now, number 4 signified the 4 seasons and the 4 elements. Number 7 was also sacred because it was the number of planets and the number of strings on a lyre. These guys really loved their music. And because Apollo's birthday was celebrated on the 7th day of each month, which is crazy to have 12 birthdays, they believed that odd numbers were masculine and even numbers were feminine. Take that, Libby. And that the number 5 represented marriage because it was the sum of 2 and 3, that being masculine and feminine. 10 was regarded as the perfect number, and the Pythagoreans honored it by never gathering in groups larger than 10. Where have we seen this before, right? These guys were far before the Essenes, I think.
Right.
I don't remember. But they're about the same time, definitely. Never gathered in groups larger than 10. This may have been the influence for that, I don't remember. Anyways. The Pythagoreans regarded the tetractys, or that little symbol in the bottom right, as utmost mystical importance. Iamblichus, which we'll talk about later, in his Life of Pythagoras, states that the I don't even know how to pronounce these things. I have got to start getting pronunciations before presenting. The tetractys, the tetractys was, quote, so admirable and so divinized to those who understood it that the Pythagorean students would swear oaths by it. So that's just kind of like fun fact about Pythagoras, and setting kind of more of the stage, because there's a lot of nuance to what we're going to talk about later with Plato. There's a lot of nuance. You got to understand what's going on
Jacob
before.
had a question.
Oh no, I was just gonna ask what the picture was.
Oh yeah,
The top right one.
that's just a depiction of reincarnation.
Oh,
I found. I thought it was fine.
I thought it was like a picture of like Jacob's ladder or something.
I can see that. So that's going to be our only representative from the Italic school. We're going to move on to the Ionian school of philosophy, starting with Thales of Miletus or Miletus. This dude is going to be 626 BC. That's real old. He was born 20 years, for context, before the book of Jeremiah was written in the Bible. So this guy's real old.
That's what my mugshot looks like.
That's what Jacob's mugshot looks like. The dates of Thales' life are not exactly known. He was Greek. He was one of the 7 sages of Greece. Each sage has a quote or maxim attributed to him, which was inscribed at the Temple of Apollo at Delphi. Thales was arguably the most famous of all. Noti, Sauton, or Know Thyself. According to the 10th century Byzantine encyclopedia, the proverb is both, quote, applied to those who boast, exceed what they are, and a warning to pay no attention to the opinion of the multitude. So his whole slogan was know thyself. Several stories of an expensive gold tripod or bowl that is to go to the most wise. In one version of this guy's writing states in his will that an expensive bowl should be given to him who has done the most good by his wisdom. So it was given to Thales, and it went around the circle of all the sages, and then it ended back up in his hands. So he was chosen twice. Thales died at the age of 78 during the Olympic Games. He actually died because of a heat stroke. So all you ladies out there, make sure you're drinking your water.
Dude.
Thanks, sweet cheeks.
So what are Thales' teachings? Well, he was actually the first Greek philosopher. That's kind of a bold claim to make, but he's commonly referred to as the first Greek philosopher. breaking from the use of mythology and instead replacing it with what is now called natural philosophy, one of the three schools of philosophy. He is credited as being the first to have engaged in mathematics, science, and deductive reasoning, at least at a systematic level. Had following students, he taught the monadic ultimate substance, water, and the earth actually floated in water. So the earth was like balancing in an ocean, and monadic being the sole source, or the divine principle, or the most important, the one singular origin of all other substances being water. He was able to calculate the heights of pyramids and the distance of ships from the shore, so he's quite the mathematician. He was an astronomer who predicted the weather, and a solar eclipse discovered the position of Ursa Major, that being a pretty common star sign even today.
I think that's the Big Dipper, I think.
Yes.
As well as the timings of solstices and equinoxes. He actually is credited with diverting a river. So, pretty cool stuff. I thought that little right triangle, he invented the right triangle. It's really hard to see, sorry gang, but I thought that was an accurate symbol to depict. So his student, Anaximander, born about the same time as he is a student. He belonged to the Milesian school and learned the teachings of his master Thales. He succeeded Thales and became the second master of that school. Little of his life is known today. According to available historical documents, he is the first philosopher known to have written down his studies, although only one fragment remains of his work. Early proponent of science, tried to observe and explain different aspects of the universe with a particular interest in the universe's origins, claiming that nature is ruled by laws. This is a very ahead of its time idea there. Just like human societies, and anything that disturbs the balance of nature does not last long. From the monist school, which began in Miletus, I'm going to call it Miletus, I like that more, with Thales, followed by Anaximander, which ended with Anaximander's successor, Anaximenes. So, he lived his final few years subject to that dude who persecuted him. So he actually is the first person to have made a map. I do talk about that, never mind. All right, so he's the first person to make a map, and that's what his map was. There's a little circle with Europe, Asia, and Libya, and then a
The
big
Mediterranean
lake.
Sea.
Yeah.
Like the biggest big
Libya?
lake.
So funny.
These dudes were not explorers. So I have a diagram up there, kind of the difference between Anaximander and Thales' ideas. He was able to predict an earthquake, no idea how that happened. And he also introduced the sundials to
We
Greeks.
can't even do that today.
He just got lucky. He just got very lucky.
The story goes like he went into this village, I forget which one, and they were like about to like raid this other kingdom, and he was like, "Yo guys, get out of here, bro. Go sleep in the fields with all your weapons." Lo and behold, the building like collapsed, and they would have all perished. So Anaximander actually understood the beginning or first principle to be an endless, unlimited primordial mass, the apeiron, subject to neither old age nor decay, that perpetually yielded fresh materials from everything we perceive is derived. He proposed that the theory of the apeiron, in direct response to that earlier theory of his teacher, that claimed that the primary substance was water. So, in other words, he believed that that air was the sole element, sole material of all things, and that all things derived from air at different compressions or whatever, condensation, whatever. So that's kind of why he believes that Earth is surrounded in a bunch of air. He's actually credited as being the first person to believe in a sort of space. So he's credited with simultaneously being a flat earther and a globalist because of his space. He's really one of the first people to believe that the Earth is floating in air, or suspended, floating at the core of the universe. So yeah, I kind of already covered that last one. He taught all of these to a student, that being Anaximenes, the final of our three here at the Aeonian School. the last of the three philosophers, I know these guys have some wicked, wicked side profiles. These three are regarded by historians as the first philosophers of the Western world, which is crazy because they're in Turkey, whatever that means. Information about his life is limited. He's only known to have written one full text, which may have been a response to his teacher's text on nature. It was described by this historian as having a simple and economical Ionic style. Ionic being Turkey. So Blood literally taught that that the arche is air, much like his teacher, but he kind of expanded on it more. He considered the basic elements to be manifestations of air, sorting them from least dense to most dense, that being fire, which has negative density, air, wind, clouds, water, earth, and stones. And Anaximenes seems to have based his conclusions on just what he saw in the water cycle, the process of rarefaction and condensation. He proposed that each substance is created by condensation to increase the density of air, or by rarefaction to decrease it.
That's bizarre.
Temperature was of particular importance to Anaximenes' philosophy, and he developed an early concept of the connection between temperature and density. He believed that expanded air was thinner and therefore hotter, while compressed air was thicker and therefore more colder, which is true. No, excuse me, it's not true. It says it's opposite. It's opposite. My mistake. So compressed air is warmer. He derived his belief from the fact that one's breath is warm when his mouth is wide, and it's cold when it's compressed to its lips. So these guys really were just doing whatever.
It makes sense to me.
He believed in an earth floating in the water, like his forefather Thales. So that's kind of the difference between the Italic and the Ionic schools, is that the Ionic schools believed in a monist, or a sole subject, that one element, one thing caused everything else. While the Italics, or as we spoke on just Pythagoras, though there were many others, believed in a pluralist or ever-changing philosophy. One quote from Heraclitus, which was a pluralist, around the same time in the same area as Pythagoras, he says that you can never step in the same river twice, so it's always changing. So pretty fun stuff there. But clearly there's a divide, which takes us to, in the year 387, which is quite a bit further, hundreds of years later, Plato, a student of the mighty ethical philosopher Socrates, founded a school for the learned called the Academy. One 20th century philosopher says that all of Western philosophy is but a footnote to Plato. Bum, bum, bum. Plato of Athens. Blood was born in the 5th century BC. Born of a high family. He studied under Socrates. Literally just said that. With his teacher's blessings, he traveled to Egypt for the highly prized teachings kept there. And he went to Italy, where he met the Pythagoreans.
Seems to be an affinity for the knowledge of Egypt.
Yeah.
I think
Maybe I should look more into that.
the Library of Alexandria, I think, is there.
Yeah.
Was there? Fly high.
Fly
I
high.
say that every time anybody references it. I think the last 3 presentations in a row, we mentioned the Library of Alexandria.
He's gonna fly high.
Anyways, he founded the most eminent school, the Academy, had many influential students and many writings. According to Tertullian, who we spoke about a couple weeks ago,
Right.
Plato simply died in his sleep at 80 years old, so that's interesting. So Plato's teachings can be kind of put into 5 core points. So he's not a relativist. He believed in ultimate truths.
Take that, Kyle.
Yeah, Kyle, you idiot. Compared to the average bloke, who by default is an imperialist, if I can't see it, it doesn't exist, right? Like I can't see the wind, so therefore it's not real, right?
Doing that in Oklahoma.
Plato saw 2 schools, that being the Ionic or the pluralist, or Italic, and the pluralist, or the Ionic or the Modanic, and he thought that our origin He saw two schools of thought on our origin and deemed them both correct. They're actually both. The monadic and the pluralist worlds are actually both correct. He said that the world under the moon is ever changing, but that there is a world that is always perfect and the same. So we as Christians would actually 100% agree with that. That being because, like, as I say in the next one, which I elaborate on, his most popular teachings, the theory of forms, is that there is a realm in which the perfect river exists, the capital R river. The perfect tree exists, the capital T tree, and this also applies for abstract concepts, such as the capital J justice. A realm that was perfect.
Jackson.
A realm. I bet there is a perfect Jackson up there. If I had to bet, hypothetically speaking.
He's right here with us.
And he's more real than our own. In Christian terms, God is more real than us. He is, in fact, autotheos. He doesn't have anything that he relies on to exist. And that heaven is more real than earth. It's been around forever, will be around forever, which earth is just temporary. What's that?
What's the mental world?
The mental world?
Yeah.
Oh, are you talking about right
The
here?
diagram I'm talking
We'll get into that.
Okay.
Good question. So we have two more preceding slides, just couldn't fit them. One thing to keep in mind here is going to be this portion right here. That he was a dualist. He believed in two different realms, two different worlds. Now, I know that goes against the thing directly above it, but that's more talking about theology, while this is talking about like the literal world. So the realm of being, that being truth, or in Christian terms, heaven, and the world of becoming, or perception, or creation in Christian terms. So obviously these are not exactly Christian concepts, but they do apply to both. So in his world, the one would be the realm of forms, while the world of becoming is earth, creation, materialism. Notice that it's higher than the other. So just keep these in mind as we proceed as a dualist. So here is a dialogue taken from his very popular book, The Republic. In fact, a lot of people would actually probably say that Plato and the Republic are like synonyms, at least in common schooling nowadays. So we're going to get into this dialogue. I thought it eloquated the theory of forms to a very good degree. He's thirsty again. Socrates says, since the beautiful is opposite of the ugly, they are two. Now, the person he's talking to says, of course. And since they are two, each is one. I grant that also. And the same account is true for the just and the unjust, the good and the bad, and all forms. Each of them is itself one, because they manifest themselves everywhere in association with actions, bodies, and one another. Each of them appears to be many. That's right. So I draw this distinction. On one side are those you just now called lovers of sights, lovers of crafts, and practical people. And on the other side, there are those who are now arguing about and whom one alone will call philosophers. What do you mean? Well, the lovers of sights and sounds like beautiful sounds, colors, shapes, and everything fashioned out of them. But their thought is unable to see and embrace the nature of beauty itself. Well, that's for show. In fact, there are few people that would be able to reach the beauty itself and see it for itself. Isn't that so? Well, certainly. What about someone who believes in beautiful things but doesn't believe that they are in the beautiful itself and isn't able to follow anyone who could lead them to the knowledge of it? Don't you think he is living in a dream rather than awakened state? Isn't this dreaming, whether asleep or awake, to think that a likeness is not a likeness but rather the thing itself that it is like? I certainly think that someone who does that is dreaming. But someone who, to take the opposite case, believes in the beautiful itself and can see both it and the things that participate in it, and doesn't believe that the participation or participants are in it, or that it itself is the participants, is he living in a dream or is he awake? Well, he is very much awake. So that's kind of confusing, I would imagine, for someone who doesn't speak in those retarded terms. Well, here's another example, that being the cave, his most famous analogy. I decided to do an artistic depiction in the middle and then an actual better interpretation in the bottom right there. So look at whichever you prefer. So there's going to be 8 key points here. Plato realizes that the general run of humankind can think and speak, etc., without any knowledge, any awareness of his realm of forms. So there's life outside of Platonians. The allegory of the cave is supposed to explain this. Well, in the allegory, Plato likens people untutored in the theory of forms to prisoners chained up in a cave, unable to turn their heads. All they can see is the wall of the cave. Behind them burns a fire. Between the fire and the prisoners, there is a parapet, along with puppeteers that walk. The puppeteers who are behind the prisoners hold up the puppets that cast shadows on the wall of the cave. And the prisoners are unable to see these puppets, the real objects that pass just behind them. The prisoners see and hear the shadows and the echoes cast by the objects, but they don't see the actual objects. Well, take a peek at the example. You can see the little dudes at the bottom and the puppeteers. You can also see the exact objects and what is emanating from them, that being the shadow from the light. Such prisoners would mistake their appearance for reality. They would think that what they see on the wall, the shadows, were real. And they would know nothing about the real causes of the shadows. So when the prisoners talk, what are they talking about? If an object is carried right behind them and it casts a shadow on the wall, the prisoner says, "Look, I see a book." What is he talking about? He thinks that he's talking about a book, but he's really just talking about the shadow, but he uses the word book. Now, what does that even refer to? Well, Plato's point is that the prisoners would be mistaken, that they would be talking in the terms in their language to refer to the shadow and call it the book. So just summarize like half that. When the prisoners are released, they can turn their heads. Whenever they gain the knowledge of the realm of the forms, they're able to turn their heads and see the real objects, and then they realize their error. Plato's aim in the Republic is to describe what is necessary for us to achieve this reflective understanding. But even without it, it remains true that our very ability to speak and to think depends on the forms. For in the terms of the language we use to get their meaning, by naming the forms that the objects we perceive participate in. Who wants to read to me the Bible verse cited? Someone's got to do it. I'm going to sit here awkwardly until somebody does.
Bryce got his phone out.
I can do
He's running.
He was actually pulling out his copy of the Republic on Apple iBooks.
James 1:17. Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of the heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows.
So, we can tell by that verse that there is some truth here, but the truth is not found in this sort of philosophic knowledge or intellectual conclusions that there is a realm of forms, but it is from God, who doesn't change like shifting shadows. So let's talk about Plato's God, the demiurge, an impersonal and unknowable creator that emanates all forms and ideas. There it is, emanating all forms and ideas. It's overflowing the languages. It's literally so full that it's producing, it's overflowing all creation from it. Unintentionally, by accident. Wow, well, where have we heard this before? Right? It's not intentionally creating anything. It's just emanating all objects, all sources. One of those things that emanates is the nous, the human mind, the conscience, the intellect. It's more than just the brain. It's you, your conscience, your thoughts. And from that nous, it develops even further to the world soul or your body. No idea why it says soul there, but that's what they call it. And the world soul interacts with nature, the world around us. So we must return back from turning away from nature, returning to our world soul, rejecting the pleasures of life, turning back from our world soul to the nous. And through turning back to the nous, we're able to reunite with the one. Ooh, I don't like it. It's scary. It's weird, it's gross, and it's wrong. So, but there's his idea. that through philosophic and intellectual assent, while living an ascetic life, you're able to become one with God. Now, to a degree, this is true for Christians. To a very nuanced degree. Of course, philosophic and intellectual assent, meaning not what Plato means by it, but rather faith in Christ our God. I gotta go pee, guys. I'm sorry.
I wish I could.
When he talks about
But then I just
cell phones and like sermons, and you can tell he's like,
An old
what are you even doing on here?
A little bit more about this. I mean, we are supposed to reject the world to a certain degree and the passions that lie within it. So there's more truth than not, but ultimately, like, we don't believe in the one. We do believe in a nous and a world soul, but the nuance is different. Their meanings is different. Their words mean different things. So not a lot of truth, but if you look really hard, you can find some. Okay. Aristotle, at 17 or 18 years old, he joined Plato's The Academy in Athens, remained there for 20 years. Shortly after Plato died, Aristotle left Athens, and at the request of Philip II of Macedon, tutored his son Alexander, yes, the Great. Don't be amazed, don't be amazed.
Wait, Alexander the Great's whose son?
Philip II.
Oh my gosh.
Now he established a library in Lyceum, I don't know, which helped him to produce many of his hundreds of books on papyrus scrolls. He encouraged Alexander towards an Eastern conquest. Aristotle's own attitude towards Persia was unabashedly racist. And one of his famous examples, he counsels Alexander to, quote, be a leader to the Greeks and a despot to the, is that how you say that? Despot to the barbarians, to look after the former as his friend and relatives, and to deal with the latter as beasts or plants. He died of a tummy ache at 62 years old.
Rest in peace.
So, Aristotle, he believed in syllogism, which is a kind of logical argument that applies deductive reasoning to arrive at a conclusion based on two propositions that are assumed or asserted to be true. Example, well, all men are mortal, and all Greeks are men. So all Greeks are mortal, right? So it's just kind of like 1 + 1, right? 1 + 1 = 2. He was also not a fan of his teacher, that being Plato's, idea that truth cannot be found in this world. Being a bit of a naturalist, Aristotle determined that the truth must be able to be found on this earth. There he is, kind of ministering to Alexander. So let's get into some diagrams. So Plato didn't necessarily believe in the one, but rather he called it the unmoved mover, which is kind of like a saying to say that it's always existed and it intentionally does things. So it implanted forms rather than emanating senselessly. I decided to use the same earth as earlier because that's true. It's a true earth. So there we are. As if the demiurge wound up a clock and observed its mechanization, or deism is what that's also called later in theology. So literally, God made the world, or the unmoved mover made the world, set it in motion, and just kind of watched it forever. So, like a clock. So there's quite a bit of difference there. An impersonal and unknowing designer that emanates all forms and ideas. An impersonal and unknowable designer that implanted all forms and ideas. So there's a little bit of contrast there. Let's look more at Plato's belief on what we were talking about earlier, about having to only know truth by looking up. Well, when you look outside and see the multiplicity of trees, you see a lot of trees, you know that each one is a tree, even though they all look entirely different. But how do you know that they're all trees? That didn't work. Well, the demiurge made the perfect tree in the realm of forms And in the world of becoming, that being earth, we somehow mystically are able to relate and know what I'm looking at is a tree. So, kind of strange there. Well, I put that slide twice. No, I didn't. The tree branch is cracking, but I forgot I included that. I was going to make sound effect.
Wow.
So cool! Oh my gosh. Well, Aristotle says, when I grab a tree branch, there must be something real within it. It cannot be that our mind, a tree branch obviously being a tiny tree, it cannot be in our mind that is the only link between the branch, and that this branch is something that is the eternal concept of what a tree or a branch is. This makes no sense and makes us godlike. So literally, what determines a tree to be a tree is what we decide in our mind, which isn't exactly objective truth, is it? Well, it's a problem if all truth exists only in our mind's perception. So Aristotle decided that when you observe the branch of or tree, that there must be truth within it so that we are able to know the perfect form. So basically, Aristotle says, well, the fullness of the entire tree is within this branch, right? The perfect form is fully contained within it, though this is not the perfect form. So you can look at the branch to know what the perfect form looks like, which is contrasted to Plato that believed that you have to mystically know the perfect form in order to know what a tree is. A better example of this would be the School of Athens, this very famous painting, I think by Leonardo? I don't know. Raphael, yeah, that dude. Anyways, so here in the middle we got Plato and Aristotle. Really easy way to remember this is Plato's literally looking up. You got to know up there to know down here, versus Aristotle that's pointing down, saying you got to know down here in order to know up there. So kind of an interesting little tidbit there, a little factoid. So a lot of time passes, and these ideas exist floating for a long, long time, hundreds of years later. Now they're still popular, but nobody really expands on it. Nobody adds to it. They just kind of accept it for what it is and say, well, I'm a follower of Aristotle. Well, I'm a follower of Plato. Like Baptists and Lutherans, right? I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. So I introduced to you Plotinus. I don't know if he's actually slashed in the face, but every depiction of him has that. I couldn't find anything. Maybe just the statue or sculpture that they found of him was damaged somehow. No idea. Anyways, he had his early education in Alexandria during its peak, fly high. Plotinus traveled extensively, visiting various philosophical and religious centers in the Mediterranean world, including Athens and Rome. During his travels, Plotinus encountered mystical and religious teachings that would later influence his philosophical thought, particularly the mystical traditions of the East and of Plato. Ooh. So dude literally traveled around Egypt, just all over the place. He appeared in Rome and founded a school that later became known as Neoplatonism, New Platonism. He was a profound lecturer. He taught on an immense number of topics within the Neoplatonic framework. His student, Porphyry, compiled his work in something called the Enneads. Well, what did this Plotinus guy teach? How is he such an immense lecturer?
Like a Lorax.
Well, he emphasized the role of the One, the source of all existence, which transcends all existence and is the ultimate source of all reality. It is beyond being and non-being, ineffable, and the source of all existence. Can we say existence more? Nous is the divine intellect, the first emanation from the One. It contains the forms or ideas, which are the archetypes of all things in the material world. So very subtle difference there. He doesn't believe that the nous is within us, but rather the nous is this other mediator realm that contains the realm of forms, that also interacts with us. Really hard to grasp there, at least it was for me. I'm not very fast. What's up?
So it is beyond being and non-being, so they believe it's all things but nothing at the same time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just vague, apophatic, mystical. nothingness.
I see.
Basically agnostic. I'm just kidding. Okay, so he changed the news a little bit. The nature of the soul, which is the intermediary between the divine realm and the material world. The soul is eternal, and its highest aspect seeks to return to the divine realm through contemplation and philosophical ascent. He discusses how the soul ascends from the divine realm into the material world, becoming entangled in the cycle of birth. Material world, the soul is eternal, and its highest aspect seeks to return to the divine realm through contemplation and philosophical ascent. He discusses how the soul ascends from the divine realm into the material world, becoming entangled in the cycle of birth and rebirth. Living a virtuous life, which involves cultivating wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice. The ultimate goal of ethics is to align oneself with the divine order and to attain union with the One. All right. Well, beauty reflects the harmony and order of the divine realm and can lead the soul towards contemplation of higher realities. Lastly, he emphasized the unity of all existence, which emanates from the One. The diversity and the multiplicity of the material world are reflections of the unity and the harmony of the divine realm. So because it's opposite, it proves that the divine realm is whole and united, because the earth is plural and in discord. Okay, basically, in other words, Neoplatonism, Plotinus recast Plato's system almost entirely, establishing Neoplatonism, in which Middle Platonism was fused with mysticism. At the summit of existence stands the One, or the Good, the source of all things. It generates from itself, as if the reflection of its own being, reason, the nous, wherein is contained the infinite store of ideas. The world soul, the copy of the nous, is generated by and contained in it, as the nous is in the One, and by informing matter in itself non-existent, constitutes bodies whose existence is contained in the world soul. Nature, therefore, is a whole endowed with life and soul. Soul, being chained to matter, longs to escape from the bondage of the body and return to its original source, the One. In virtue and philosophical thought, it has the power to elevate itself above the reason into a state of ecstasy, where it can behold or ascend to that one good primary being whom reason cannot know. To attain union with the Good, or the One, is the true function of human beings. Plotinus' disciple, Porphyry, followed by Iamblichus, developed the system in conscious opposition to Christianity. So Plotinus was the first guy that wasn't just straight up anti-Christian.
I had a professor and then a student try to convince me, well, a class, that Christianity dipped off of Neoplatonism.
That's why I made this.
And it was like they took the Jewish God and then they took Neoplatonism ideas and then formed a new religion, Christianity. And that's why Christianity's wrong. It's because it's actually just this with Jewishness mashed onto it.
Catholic Church is a little bit.
Well, I've heard that too. That's why I made this presentation. Exactly why. Thank you for bringing that up.
You're welcome.
So what you're saying is they need to take ecstasy and they'll get smart?
I think that's actually the opposite of what it's saying. It's saying you'll be smart so you achieve a state of ecstasy.
Okay.
And I think that's the opposite of what will happen if you do that.
Okay.
Well, Porphyry, we just got a couple more dudes to talk about, and then we'll wrap it up with some Bible. So Porphyry of Tyre, which is in Lebanon, he studied under Plotinus, became one of Plotinus' most prominent students, and later, Plotinus' biographer, the usual, real smart guy, wrote a bunch. But this time he hated Christians. In fact, one of his most prominent works is called Against the Christians. This writing was later condemned by Christian leaders.
Shocker.
Are we united in the One? Leaders and the center of the center of much theological debate. Not a ton is known about his life. I dug and dug, couldn't really find anything interesting to throw in there.
He had 74 cats.
We'll get into that, Jacob. So let's talk
No, not
more philosophical concepts. Let's go. Isn't this exciting? Well, he elaborated on Plotinus's metaphysical framework, emphasizing the hierarchical structure of reality. He explored the relationship between the one, the nous, and the soul, as well as their role in shaping the material world. Porphyry placed great importance on ethical philosophy, unlike his teacher, and the great cultivation of virtues. He believed that the ultimate goal of human life is to achieve fulfillment or happiness through the practice of virtues such as wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. Just like Lincoln's prayer request. He was, just kidding, don't hit me please. He was interested in theurgy, a set of ritual practices aimed at invoking the divine powers and achieving spiritual purification. He believed that theurgy could facilitate the soul's ascent to higher levels of reality and enable union with the divine. What year is this guy again? Oh yeah, 3rd, 4th century. Well, he challenged Christian documents and argued against the validity of Christian beliefs, portraying Christianity as a form of superstition incompatible with rational inquiry, which, gosh, isn't that a little bit ironic, right?
Right.
The speck versus the plank. Generally, kind of a middleman, mostly just expanded on the new teachings that bridge the gap between Plotinus and Iamblichus. But there is one kind of interesting thing which Jacob pointed out, that being the Porphyrian tree. So there's a really artistic depiction.
Is that Kabbalah?
Doesn't that look familiar, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't it look familiar? It's not the same, but it does look familiar.
The tree of life and Kabbalah.
Well, here's a translated version. It's really not that cool. It's really not that cool.
It just looks wild.
It just looks like really wild, and it's just like, well, a human thinks and is not me, so therefore it exists, right? It's like, just whatever, bro. And this is kind of how I feel about it.
Good chop down the tree or something.
The last dude, I think, I'm pretty sure this is the last dude we're going to talk about. Iamblichus. This guy is definitely the most wild. He quickly raised the ranks of the Neoplatonic leadership, heavily developed the mystical nature of it. Is anybody here a fan of mystical teachers?
No.
Mystical natures?
No. I hate it. It's disgusting.
Sure, you guys say that now, and then you go back home.
What?
I know you're getting mystical.
Alright, well, this dude highly perpetuated theurgy, which is a form of occult magic, especially of a cosmic nature. All these dudes really are so similar. It's hard to talk about so many of them without being entirely redundant. Blood just took the Platonic noetic ladder and added space demon intercession because what he says in his treatises are fascinating. Such interesting and thought-provoking things he has to say, but genuinely, he just added demon magic. I won't get a video clip. I forgot to remove that.
We see the demons.
So after I explain this a little further, we'll get into the Christian defense against Plato and his little thinker goblins.
Oh.
You know it's serious whenever it's matched with the CK.
That's right. I had to do it to him, bro. I hate how they dropped the K, bro. Dang, modern English.
Is that a phoenix on the right of them?
Sure is. Sure is.
I guess that's to represent reincarnation.
Yeah. This guy's following along. Alright, so we're going to talk a little bit about Iamblichus and his theurgy. Well, with the rise of different influences on Neoplatonism, so did the hierarchy of the gods also rise. Then the goetic realm, not noetic, but goetic realm, was thought up, and many occult beliefs/practices began, including that of grimoires and rites. Lesser gods and demigods spawned and became useful for the return to the one. Does anybody here know what a grimoire is? Can anybody tell me what a grimoire is?
Isn't it like a book of magic stuff?
Exactly right.
It's the shape from McDonald's.
Yeah, it's a grimace shape. It's a grimoire shape.
Bring up my boy grimace.
I tried the grimace shape for the first time. You end up in theurgic cycles and ritual magic.
Not again.
Oh my gosh, me and Lincoln's just average Saturday. Well, theurgical practices, or divine work, because theology is the study of the divine, while theurgic would be practicing or work of the divine.
I see.
Often included performing sacred rites and making offerings to the gods as a way to honor and to appease them. These offerings could include libations, incense, and symbolic objects. Well, symbolism played a significant role in theurgical practices, ritual gestures such as hand movements and symbolic actions. And
He's literally hitting the witty at
we're
discipleship.
employed to evoke spiritual energies and establish a link between the earthly and the divine realms. Theurgy also involved the use of mystical visualizations and contemplative techniques to attain higher states of consciousness. Mystical visualizations and contemplative techniques to attain higher states of consciousness and spiritual insights. Practitioners would engage in meditative practices aimed at transcending the limitations of the material world and experiencing union with the divine. Iamblichus believed in a hierarchical structure of divine beings, with the divine being at the pinnacle, and various intermediary beings and deities occupying the different levels of existence. Theurgical practices often sought to establish contact with these intermediary beings to facilitate spiritual ascent. Yeah.
Is the little picture in the middle on the right? Is that like supposed to be the hierarchy of spiritual?
The news.
Yeah, it was a diagram that I found.
Okay.
Yeah, pretty much.
It's cool that you started off referencing Dante, because that's exactly how Dante represents his system of heaven leading up from earth and his tiers of heaven.
With the different
It
planets.
looks exactly like that, yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So a lot of these teachings, are kind of still around today. You have a bunch of retards that think that you
Why
can
you
just
look at me when you say that?
you were looking at me,
A bunch
so
of retards.
yeah, a bunch of retards that will drop tabs of acid or take psychedelic mushrooms and have these mystical experiences with the divine. And I mean, what they experience, I believe, is to a degree true. They do experience some sort of deity being, but it's not God, it's not the one, it's not the monad, it's
Demons.
exactly right.
They say they're writing best-selling books about the Looking Glass.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I thought that this cover of this book pretty accurately described what it is in theurgy, theory and practice, the mysteries of the ascent to the divine, Homeric epics, the Chalcedonian oracles, and Neoplatonic ritual. It's just a bunch of crap, man. I mean, this stuff is real. Occult magic is real. You think that people just sacrificed their children to Baal for thousands of years and never got anything out of it? This stuff is real. I mean, the belief by these theurgical teachers, and I've read many of them, they genuinely believe that they are able to cast the daimons, which are, it's kind of an ironic name, daimon, which is an intermediary being. We would call them demons. They're the same. They actually are able to, now this is why there's so many Egyptian gods, is they were able to force the demons to go into their little idols and assume that form and work that way. There wasn't a god of the Nile that they just so happened to discover. They made the god of the Nile for themselves so that they could attempt to control it. And that stuff is absolutely real.
I guess the term the gods of men
Exactly.
is a very appropriate term.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So let's get into some of Neoplatonism's corruption of early Christian thinkers. This guy should be awfully familiar. We talked about him just a couple weeks ago, and I put the text in the middle of the screen on accident. Origen was a 2nd century Christian leader, teacher, theologian, who had been very much influenced by Platonic thought, especially that to do with the soul. Origen attempted to mix the gospel with the noetic ladder and ended up with the heresy of Origenism. Origenism believes that souls always existed, will always exist, and because they always existed and exist, that means that things like hell are just temporary. It's just a temporary judgment. and that anybody, including the devil himself, will eventually get out of hell and be in heaven alongside us. So
That's nice.
many terrible, terrible beliefs.
Right.
This guy, Jewish biblical exegete of the philosopher Philo of Alexandria, was a Judaic Platonist who attempted to merge two beliefs into one, that being Judaic and Platonist. This guy was before Christ came. So it's pretty interesting to know that it also influenced a lot of maybe Jewish teachers as well. If you want to learn more about that guy. St. Augustine himself, or Augustine, was a Neoplatonist before converting. But let's look at what the early church did against these thinker goblins. Well, Tertullian, who we talked about just a couple weeks ago, famously said, "For what does Athens to do with Jerusalem? What concord is there between the academy and the church? What between heretics and Christians? Completely separating the two." So, pretty powerful statement there.
That is actually, I think, a term for people who like apostatize to science. Is they turn away. I think the point is they turn their back on Jerusalem and turn towards Athens. That's actually kind of cool.
That is cool. I think I need to start using them. So Jerusalem, obviously, meaning Christianity, church, Jesus. Well, Athens meaning the Greeks, the thought, the thinker goblins. So John Chrysostom, who's a 4th century theologian, had this to say: "For the Athenians, even if they said anything agreeable to the truth, did not say it in a commendable way, nor with a correct opinion. They saw only a few things, and they saw thee in a disorderly way, not in a whole. They're not as a whole." So they discovered some truth. It's absolutely true that they found truth.
Right.
That there is a creator, that things didn't just appear out of nothing. But what they saw was missing something, that being divine revelation from God. Augustine, I have a couple quotes here, just because he wrote just so much against it. Being an ex-Neoplatonist, he had a lot to say.
Right.
One of those things being, the top one here, "It is not that I have Hannah, help me, inveterate hostility towards all philosophers, but only to that which is false, and what is more false than the wisdom which, when one God was known, knew him not." That's a typo. "Knew him not, but worshipped instead the various works of creatures." So what is there worse? What is there less pious than to worship God, or to not worship God when he has revealed himself?
Right.
Bottom right, "For demons can indeed perform certain marvels, but they do not to help humans, but to ensnare them further from the darkness and away from the light of truth."
Right.
Lastly, "Beware of those who would lead you into a practice of theurgy, for they would lead you astray from the true path of righteousness and salvation. It is through faith in Christ and obedience to his teachings that we find true enlightenment and liberation." Liberation from death. Basil, one of the Cappadocian
That
fathers.
beard is righteous.
We're in the home stretch, guys. I think there's literally one slide after this. He says, "It is not philosophy that saves, it is Christ. Philosophical wisdom is in itself a good thing. But when the world failed to recognize God through wisdom, it pleased God to save us believers through the gospel." So there's him yet again saying that we need God's intervention, his revelation of himself to us. Do not seek for anything beyond the words of the Bible. The Holy Scripture contains all that is needed for salvation. Let us not go beyond the sacred pages. Well, let's follow what he says. Never mind. A broken clock. Thomas Aquinas said this about Athens. A broken clock. Thomas Aquinas said this about Athens: "The Neoplatonists believe that the ultimate end of human life is to contemplate, the one. The ultimate principle of reality through philosophical contemplation alone." There's a sola philosophico complete. However, the Christian understanding is that the ultimate end of human life is to love and to enjoy God, which requires divine revelation and the grace of God. So, pretty profound statement from Thomas there. Let's follow St. Basil and what he said about the scriptures. Got a couple Bible verses here. 5. Human knowledge and its observation can only take you so far without divine revelation. God tells us this outright. Starting from the top there.
You want us to read?
I expect you to read.
Okay. I'll do the Colossians verses.
Hey, that's right. That's right.
I don't know if I can say it.
What do you mean?
John 1 through 3. What a coincidence. That's crazy. Today they were prescribed the memorization of those verses.
I think I can do the first two, but that's it.
In the
Give it to
beginning.
us. Give it to us.
Wait, we have to
You
do
have
the
to wait,
words.
guys.
Sorry.
Hannah's getting Colossians. Someone get Corinthians.
I'll go
All right.
Corinthian.
I'll go Roman.
All right, thank you. So there's 2 Colossians.
First Chronicles 1:25.
No.
Oh, I might have just got Then Jehoiakim, the king of Judah.
Wow.
All right.
Read it.
What is the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men.
We cannot know more than God.
First Colossians, or just Colossians. Colossians 2 verse 8. See to it that no one takes you captive by philosophy and empty deceit, according to human tradition, according to the elemental spirits of the world, and not according to Christ. And then verse 17 says, these are but a shadow of the things to come, but the substance belongs to Christ.
So we can know some things, but the full truth of reality is in Christ alone. He's got Jonathan. Right.
Let's see if I remember it. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through
That's
him all
good.
things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made.
That's good. Good job. You're close.
What?
Get it, Bethany.
Claiming to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things.
I think that verse is almost prophetically talking exclusively about theurgy and their demonic practices. Like you think about, like I said earlier, about the gods of Egypt, animals, creeping things, became fools. So
Yeah.
that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
And Jeremiah, it says about when people made idols that they can't think of anything beyond humans or creatures or